Just play it, Ilara, a snide voice had echoed through the hall. If you even can. It's practically antique, just like your spirit. This is the story of Ilara Vance, a woman dismissed and underestimated by the privileged residents of her small, fading town. When a cruel joke forces her to confront a broken past and a dilapidated piano, her hidden talent doesn't just shock a room. It ignites a quiet revolution, exposing the deep-seated prejudices that hold Oakhaven captive and proving that true beauty and power can emerge from the most unexpected places. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now, let's get back to the story. Just play it, Ilara, a snide voice had echoed through the hall. If you even can. It's practically antique, just like your spirit. Ilara Vance felt the words like stones in her stomach, each one landing with a dull thud, heavy and familiar. She was standing by the punch bowl, ladling out the watery crimson liquid, her focus meticulously set on avoiding spills, as if a single drop could somehow shatter the delicate peace she'd painstakingly built around herself. It was the annual Oakhaven Harvest Festival, a tradition as old and worn as the town itself. And like every year, Ilara was there, a ghost flitting between the shadows, serving the people who barely registered her existence. Oakhaven. The name itself whispered of forgotten beauty, of grand oak trees that once shaded thriving streets, now mostly hollowed and overgrown. These days, it was a town slowly ceding to time, its grandeur faded, its spirit chipped away by economic hardship and the quiet exodus of its youth. Only the families with deep roots, or those too weary to leave, remained. Ilara, at 34, was one of the weary, bound by a history she couldn't outrun and a promise she couldn't break. Her hands, usually quick and efficient, faltered, nearly tipping the heavy glass pitcher. She looked up, her gaze instinctively drawn to the source of the cutting words. It was Bethany Thorne, draped in a designer dress that seemed an affront to the humble decor of the Oakhaven Community Hall. Beside her, her brother Chase, leaning against the makeshift stage, a smirk playing on his lips. The Thorne siblings, heirs to the town's only remaining textile mill, embodied everything Ilara was not: privilege, ease, and a casual cruelty that came from never having to truly see anyone but themselves. They stood surrounded by their usual entourage, a constellation of polished smiles and dismissive glances, all fixated on her, Ilara. She wasn't simply Ilara Vance, the woman who cleaned the Thornes' sprawling estate twice a week. Tonight, she was the silent entertainment, the subject of their amusement. Her eyes drifted past them, to the corner of the stage where their attention, and now hers, was directed. There it sat, like a forgotten monument to a bygone era, a grand piano once majestic, now reduced to a husk. Its mahogany finish was chipped, the ivory keys yellowed and fractured, some missing entirely, revealing the felt beneath like decaying teeth. A thin layer of dust veiled its surface, catching the hall's anemic light. Everyone in Oakhaven knew that piano. It had sat there for years, a relic of the hall's former glory, unplayable, a permanent fixture of neglect. It was the butt of every joke, the symbol of what Oakhaven had lost. "Come on, Ilara," Bethany's voice, a sweet poison, cut through the din of the festival. "We're having a little impromptu talent show. Don't tell me the cleaning lady doesn't have a hidden talent? Maybe you can play us a tune on that beautiful old thing." A ripple of muffled laughter spread through the group. Ilara's cheeks burned. It wasn't the first time they'd singled her out, but usually it was a quiet slight, a dismissive wave, a comment about her worn-out shoes. This was different. This was public, calculated, and aimed at the one thing she kept buried deeper than any secret. "She's just being modest, Beth," Chase chimed in, his voice dripping with feigned concern. "Perhaps she's a prodigy, simply waiting for her moment to shine. Go on, Alara. Don't be shy." He gestured grandly towards the broken piano, as if inviting her to claim her throne. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She could feel the stares of the other townspeople, the ones who usually offered a kind word or a knowing glance. Most of them now looked away, embarrassed for her, or perhaps simply unwilling to challenge the thorns. It was the Oakhaven way. "You didn't cross the thorns." A memory flashed through her mind, sharp and vivid. Younger hands, smaller than her own now, flying across a perfect keyboard, the notes singing bright and clear. A different piano in a different time, before the dust settled, before the music died. A time when her mother's smile was boundless, not tinged with worry. I don't think so," Ilara murmured, her voice barely a whisper, an apology for her existence. She clutched the punch ladle tighter, her knuckles white. "Oh, don't be such a spoil sport." Bethany's laugh was brittle, high-pitched. "It's all in good fun. Unless you can't play, can you? It's not much of a talent if you can't even coax a sound out of a grand piano, is it?" The insinuation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just about the piano. It was about her, Ilara. Her life, her perceived lack of ambition, of worth. They saw her as a broken instrument, incapable of producing anything of value. It was the narrative they'd woven for her, for years, the story Oakhaven seemed to believe. A quiet defiance, a spark Ilara rarely allowed herself to feel, flickered within her. A small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her. It was a faint echo of a fire that once burned bright, a memory of a time when music wasn't a burden, but a boundless joy. She looked at the broken keys, the missing ivories, the dust-laden surface. It was a reflection of something within her, too. Broken, unused, forgotten. But as she met Bethany's smug, expectant gaze, something shifted. It wasn't just the taunt. It was the sheer dismissiveness, the casual cruelty that had been a constant companion in her life, a subtle current pulling her down, and suddenly she was tired of being pulled. With a deep breath, Ilara placed the punch ladle back in its bowl with a soft clink. The sound seemed to resonate disproportionately in the sudden quiet of the hall. Every eye was on her now. She moved, not towards the kitchen as they expected, but towards the stage. Each step was a small revolution, a silent rebellion. She reached the piano, its cold, aged wood against her fingertips. The dust clung to her skin like a second skin. She glanced at the keys, a jagged, uneven smile of wood and plastic. She knew what they expected. A fumbling attempt, a discordant clash, confirming their joke, cementing her place. Her fingers, calloused from years of cleaning and mending, hovered over the keys. She remembered her mother's words, a lullaby whispered on a summer evening. Music isn't just about the notes, Ilara. It's about the silence between them, the story they tell, and the heart that pours through. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, the past and present colliding. Then, with a hesitant breath, she pressed a single yellowed key. A jarring, tinny thwack echoed through the hall, a sound so utterly discordant and out of tune it made several people wince. A snicker broke out from the Thorns group, a collective sigh of satisfied confirmation. "Just as we thought," Chase muttered, loud enough for Ilara to hear. Ilara's eyes flew open, meeting the expectant, mocking glares. Her cheeks flushed again, but this time it was not just embarrassment. It was something else. A challenge. A fierce, quiet resolve settled over her features. She looked down at the broken keys again, her gaze no longer despairing, but studying them, measuring them. She closed her eyes one more time, not in hesitation, but in concentration. When she opened them, her focus was absolute. She took another deep, shuddering breath. Her fingers moved, slowly at first, then with an unspoken intent, hovering just above the keyboard, seeking a path, a melody, a story to tell through the brokenness. The jarring, tinny thwack of the first key had been a punch to the gut, a confirmation for the sneering Thorns, a collective wince for the few compassionate souls in the Oak Haven Community Hall. But then something shifted. Ilara's breath was shallow, almost imperceptible. Her eyes, open now, were not fixed on her tormentors, but on the ravaged keys before her. She didn't fight the brokenness. She listened to it. Her fingers, calloused and strong, didn't glide across the perfect ivories she once knew. Instead, they adapted, dancing in an unfamiliar ballet across the chipped, yellowed remnants. A missing F-sharp? Her thumb found a workaround, coaxing a muted harmony from a neighboring G, a cracked B-flat. She pressed it lighter, letting its faint, reedy protest weave into a minor chord. What emerged wasn't a pristine classical piece, but something entirely new, raw, and deeply, achingly beautiful. It began with a single haunting note, fragile yet resonant, a melancholic echo of Oak Haven itself. Then another and another, building slowly, deliberately, into a melody that felt like a quiet lament, a story whispered through the dust and decay of the old piano. It was a tune born of resilience, of sorrow, and of an undeniable, powerful grace. The snickers from Bethany Thorne's circle died, replaced by a growing, stunned silence. Chase Thorne, who had been leaning against the stage with an air of arrogant amusement, slowly straightened, his smirk fading, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then grudging respect. Even Bethany, whose initial expression was a mixture of disdain and triumph, found her jaw slackening, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ilara played on, her posture erect, her head tilted slightly, as if listening not just to the notes, but to the ghosts that stirred within the old wood. Her body swayed gently, lost in a rhythm only she could fully hear. The hall, usually filled with the clinking of glasses and the drone of small talk, grew utterly still. People paused mid-conversation, plates forgotten, eyes drawn to the solitary figure on the stage. For Ilara, the hall vanished. The Thorns, the judgmental stares, the years of quiet subjugation, all faded into the periphery. There was only the piano, the music, and the rush of memories. She was a girl again, small and earnest, her mother's hands gently guiding hers over a polished keyboard. "Feel the music, Ilara." Her mother's voice, soft as a melody, echoed in her mind. "Let it tell your story." Her mother, a woman who had dreamed of a grander life, a life of music that Oak Haven, with its fading opportunities, had steadily suffocated. The melody swelled, weaving in crescendos of defiance and decrescendos of resignation. It was the sound of unanswered prayers, of forgotten dreams, of the quiet strength of Oak Haven's people who weathered storm after storm, who kept going despite the odds stacked against them. It was the sound of a town clinging to hope, a fragile, determined hope. Her fingers danced over the broken keys, finding harmonies in unexpected places, creating a unique, almost percussive rhythm out of the piano's limitations. She was not just playing. She was breathing life back into something everyone had dismissed as dead. She was taking the brokenness and making it beautiful, poignant. A tear traced a path down her cheek, unheeded. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of release. Years of unspoken words, of quiet pain, of simmering resentment poured out through the music. She remembered her mother's final days, the piano silent, covered with a dust sheet, her dreams fading as swiftly as the Oakhaven textile industry. Ilara had vowed then, a fierce, desperate promise, to never let anything consume her spirit the way Oakhaven had consumed her mother's. But life had a way of wearing you down, didn't it? Until now. The music was a conversation, a challenge, a plea. It spoke of injustice, of the unacknowledged worth of those dismissed, of the enduring spirit of a community struggling to survive. It was the anthem of the unseen, the unheard. Across the room, old Mr. Henderson, whose family had worked in the thorn mill for 3 generations before it began laying off workers, wiped a tear from his eye. Mrs. Gable, a widow who knitted blankets for every newborn in Oakhaven, gripped her husband's hand, her gaze fixed on Ilara, a spark of recognition in her tired eyes. They felt it, the common thread, the shared struggle Ilara was so eloquently articulating. Bethany, her face a mask of bewildered fury, took a step forward as if to disrupt the spell. "That's enough," she began, her voice brittle, but the words caught in her throat. Ilara's music, though delicate, was a force field, a silent, powerful command that brooked no interruption. The melody swelled, an insistent, almost indignant counterpoint to Bethany's failed attempt. Ilara finished, not with a flourish, but with a lingering, soft chord that faded into the echoes of the hall. Her hands dropped slowly from the keys, resting on the dusty wood, as if she had just finished a deeply personal, arduous journey. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier and more profound than any sound. Not a single cough, not a whisper. It was the silence of a room utterly captivated, utterly transformed. The air crackled with a new energy, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. No one clapped. No one spoke. They simply stared, their faces etched with a mixture of awe, regret, and something akin to dawning hope. Then, from the back of the room, a voice, raspy and choked with emotion, broke the spell. That was Oakhaven's lament, wasn't it? It was Mr. Henderson again, his eyes wide, fixed on Ilara. "Your mother's song. I haven't heard it in 30 years. Ilara's head snapped up, her breath catching in her throat. Her mother's song. A piece she thought no one remembered. A piece she hadn't played since that fateful day her mother closed the piano for the last time. How could he know? The question hung in the sudden, charged silence, drawing everyone's attention not just to Ilara, but to the forgotten history now stirring awake in the heart of Oakhaven. "Your mother's song. I haven't heard it in 30 years. Mr. Henderson's voice, raw with memory, hung in the air, a bell tolling a forgotten truth. Ilara's breath hitched. 30 years. It had been exactly that long since she had last touched those keys, since her mother had gently closed the lid of their family piano, the music dying with the last vestiges of hope in Oakhaven. How could he possibly know? A jolt of fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. This song was a private grief, a sacred memory. not something to be unveiled in front of the thorns and their calculating stares. She turned to Mr. Henderson, her eyes wide, searching his lined face. He wasn't looking at her as if she were a servant or a target for ridicule. He was looking at her mother, at a past long buried. His eyes held a profound sadness, mingled with a fragile wonder. "Yes," Elara managed, her voice a mere thread. "It is. My mother. She composed it. She called it Oakhaven's Lament." The words, once a whisper in the privacy of her heart, now spoken aloud, felt like a powerful incantation, summoning spirits from the past. A ripple of murmurs, softer than the whispers that usually circulated about her, began to spread through the hall. Faces that had been blank or dismissive now held a glimmer of recognition, a dawning understanding. Mrs. Gable, tears openly streaming down her cheeks, stepped forward. Elara's mother, Amelia Vance, she had such a gift. Everyone knew it. She dreamed of playing professionally. Suddenly, the attention wasn't just on Elara, the cleaning lady who could play a broken piano. It was on Amelia Vance, the woman whose dreams Oakhaven had quietly devoured. It was on the injustice that had shadowed Elara's life, a legacy of unfulfilled potential. Bethany Thorne, who had been simmering in furious disbelief, bristled. "Amelia Vance? Really? I recall she was simply a seamstress at the mill, talented, perhaps, in her own way, but hardly a musical prodigy." Her voice was dismissive, an attempt to reassert control, to diminish the moment. Chase, beside her, offered a tight, forced smile, but his eyes darted around the room, assessing the changing tide of emotion. He recognized the danger of this unfolding narrative. But the townspeople weren't listening to Bethany. They were remembering. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. "Amelia designed some of the most beautiful patterns for the mill, too. She had a heart for Oakhaven, always hoped for more for us. That song, it was her wish for this town, her sorrow for what it was losing." A wave of nostalgia, thick and palpable, washed over the room. For years, the Thorns had cultivated a narrative of Oakhaven's decline being inevitable, painting themselves as the benevolent, if slightly exasperated, custodians of its slow decay. But Elara's music, and now these memories, were stirring a different story. A story of a vibrant past, of dreams suppressed, of potential squandered. Elara felt a strange, exhilarating courage rising within her. The shame she had carried for so long, the burden of being less than, began to lift, replaced by a fierce pride in her mother's memory. She looked at the Thorns, her gaze steady, devoid of its usual apology. "My mother believed Oakhaven had music in its soul," Elara said, her voice stronger now, clear and resonant, cutting through the hall. She believed its greatest treasures weren't in its factories, but in its people, in their resilience, in their hope. She wrote this song when the mill first started laying off workers, when the first whispers of despair began to settle over this town. Chase Thorne stepped forward, his face carefully composed, but his eyes holding a dangerous glint. "Elara, I think we've all had a lovely trip down memory lane, but the Harvest Festival is hardly the place for political statements." His tone was smooth, condescending, a veiled threat. "Perhaps you should go back to your duties." The unspoken message was clear. Know your place. But Elara didn't flinch. The music had purged her of fear. "Perhaps it is exactly the place, Chase," she countered, her voice unwavering. "This is our town. This is our history. And this piano, broken as it is, still holds a voice, just like Oakhaven still has a voice." Her words resonated, sparking quiet nods and murmurs of agreement from the crowd. The Thorns' usual dominance, their carefully constructed aura of unquestionable authority, was cracking. A new surge of feeling welled up in Alara. It wasn't just about her mother anymore. It was about every person in that room who had been overlooked, undervalued, or pushed aside. This wasn't just a performance. It was an awakening. This piano, Ilara continued, gesturing to the dilapidated instrument. They say it's beyond repair. They say it's just like Oakhaven, fading, broken. But I found a way to make it sing. What if we found a way for Oakhaven to sing again? She looked around the room, meeting the gaze of each townsperson, her eyes filled with an earnest plea. My mother always said that true beauty isn't about perfection, but about the spirit that shines through the imperfections. And Oakhaven has spirit. It has heart. We don't need to be defined by what's lost. We can be defined by what we rebuild. A nervous energy vibrated through the hall. This was no longer just a talent show. This was a challenge, a call to action. Bethany's face was now a mask of barely contained fury. Her eyes met Ilara's, and for the first time, Ilara saw not just disdain, but a flicker of fear. And how exactly do you propose we build, Ilara? Bethany spat, the sweetness gone from her voice, replaced by cold malice. With your cleaning wages? With dreams and broken pianos? She let out a short, derisive laugh. Oakhaven needs investment, not nostalgia. And frankly, your little performance, while quaint, changes nothing. Ilara took a step forward, away from the piano, towards the edge of the stage, her gaze fixed on Bethany. It changes everything, Bethany, she said, her voice dropping to a low, powerful register that compelled absolute attention. Because for the first time in a long time, we remembered who we are. We remembered what we've lost. And now, we're going to remember what we can still become, starting with this hall. She paused, letting the implications sink in. This community hall, this broken piano, this entire festival, it all belongs to Oakhaven, to us. And I intend to make sure it thrives again, just as my mother would have wanted. And I have an idea how we can start. An idea that will need every single one of us. An idea that will need this piano. She looked from the piano to the faces of the townspeople, a plan hardening in her eyes. Because this isn't just about music anymore. It's about our future. It's about challenging the very people who think they own that future. And I promise you, by next year's festival, this piano will be fully restored, and it will be the sound of our new Oakhaven. But to do that, I need to know one thing. Will you stand with me? Ilara's question hung in the air, echoing through the charged silence of the Oakhaven Community Hall. Will you stand with me? For a beat, no one moved. The townspeople exchanged uncertain glances, their faces etched with the ingrained caution that came from years of deference to the Thorne family. Bethany Thorne, her face flushed with indignation, opened her mouth to speak, but before a word could escape, a single clear voice cut through the tension. I will, Ilara. It was Mr. Henderson. He stepped forward, his slight frame surprisingly resolute, his eyes meeting Ilara's with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. Amelia Vance was a visionary, and that song, it carried us through some dark times. It's time we heard it again, loud and clear. His words, simple yet powerful, broke the dam. Mrs. Gable, her usually gentle hands clenched into fists, followed suit. And I will too. This hall, this town, it deserves more than whispers and forgotten dreams. Then, a ripple. Old Man Miller, The gruff owner of the hardware store gave a curt nod. Young Sarah Jenkins, who worked the counter at the diner, stepped out from the shadows, her eyes bright with a nascent hope. One by one, hesitant at first, then with growing conviction, people began to voice their support, a quiet chorus swelling into a determined wave. It wasn't a roar, not yet, but a powerful murmur of agreement that vibrated through the old hall. Bethany Thorne gasped, her carefully cultivated composure shattering. "This is preposterous. Ilara, you're suggesting what exactly? A bake sale to restore a relic? This is an insult to everything my family has done for this town." Her voice was shrill, her fury undisguised. Chase Thorne, however, was colder. His eyes narrowed, calculating. He saw the shift in the room, the fragile allegiance forming around Ilara. He saw a threat not just to his family's pride, but to their control. "Ilara, be realistic," he interjected, his voice deceptively calm. "Restoring a grand piano of that age requires specialized craftsmen, rare parts. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars. Where do you propose this new Oak Haven finds that kind of money?" His tone was laced with a patronizing pity, an attempt to douse the spark before it became a flame. Ilara met his gaze head-on, her spine stiff. "We find it, Chase," she stated, her voice steady. "We find it through our own hands, our own ingenuity. My mother always said, when a community truly believes, resources appear." She paused, letting her words sink in. "My idea is this. We don't just restore the piano. We restore this entire community hall. It becomes a hub again, a place for local artists, for educational workshops, for the young people who are leaving Oak Haven because they see no future here. We make it a beacon." A wave of excitement rippled through the gathered townspeople. This was more than just a piano. It was a promise. "And the money?" Bethany scoffed, her arms crossed, her eyes still blazing. "Are you going to clean every house in Oak Haven for free to pay for it?" "No," Ilara replied, her gaze firm. "We're going to hold a series of fundraisers, community events, dinners, talent shows. We'll raise the money ourselves, by ourselves. We'll call it the Oak Haven Revival Project. And the first step," she turned and pointed to the broken piano, "is to prove to ourselves that we can bring something beautiful back to life. That piano will be our symbol, our proof of what's possible when we stand together." She paused, then added, her voice ringing with newfound authority, "And for those who wish to contribute, not just with money, but with their time, their skills, their ideas, every single contribution will be valued. Because this isn't about charity, Bethany. It's about collective ownership. It's about pride." The energy in the hall was electric. For too long, Oak Haven had been a town of quiet resignation. Now, a different current ran through it, one of hope, of defiance. Chase Thorne's composure finally cracked. He stepped fully onto the stage, approaching Ilara, his voice a low, dangerous whisper meant only for her. "You are playing a very dangerous game, Ilara. My family has sustained this town, however meagerly, for generations. To challenge us, to stir up false hope among these people, it will only lead to disappointment. And you, Ilara Vance, will be the one they blame when it all falls apart." His words were a venomous dart, designed to resurrect the old fears, to remind her of her place. But Ilara, emboldened by the silent backing of her community, stood her ground. "Perhaps, Chase," she said, her voice equally low, "or perhaps they will blame those who kept them down for so long. The tides are turning. You just haven't learned to swim yet." Bethany, overhearing the exchange, stepped forward, her face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. My father sits on the town council. You think a few sympathetic old folks can defy the established order? This hall, this property, it's all subject to the council's decisions. And they, Alara, answer to those who truly understand Oakhaven's needs." Her implication was clear. The Thorns controlled the council. Ilara's gaze swept over the room. The faces of the townspeople, though still hesitant, were now alight with a tentative resolve. They had heard the veiled threat, the thinly disguised power play. They had seen the Thorns' true colors. "Then it seems," Ilara announced, raising her voice so it carried across the hall, "we have more than just a piano to restore. We have our voices to reclaim. We have our town to reclaim." She turned back to the crowd, a determined glint in her eyes. "Let's start tomorrow. We'll organize. We'll plan. And we'll show them that Oakhaven is more than a name on a ledger. It's a community with a heartbeat." A cheer, small at first, then growing in strength, erupted from the townspeople. It was ragged, uncoordinated, but undeniably genuine. It was the sound of a sleeping giant beginning to stir. As the festival dispersed, the air was still thick with tension and a burgeoning sense of purpose. Ilara, though exhausted, felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. She watched the Thorns depart, their faces grim, their hurried whispers confirming their deep displeasure. She knew this wouldn't be easy. She knew their power ran deep. Later that evening, as Ilara walked home through the quiet, moonlit streets of Oakhaven, the melody of her mother's song played in her mind. No longer a lament, but a burgeoning anthem. She paused by the old stone bridge overlooking the sluggish Oakhaven River, a place she often came to find solace. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and late autumn leaves. She closed her eyes, imagining the community hall bustling with activity, the piano restored, its notes ringing clear and true. But her peaceful reverie was abruptly shattered by the sound of a car approaching too fast, its tires spitting gravel. The vehicle, a sleek, dark sedan, pulled up sharply beside her, bathing her in its harsh headlights. The window rolled down slowly, revealing Chase Thorn, his face grim, his eyes holding a cold, unsettling glint. "A word of advice, Ilara," he said, his voice stripped of its earlier pretense of civility. "Some things are best left broken. You're stirring up trouble you can't possibly imagine." His threat was stark, chilling. "And when the music stops, you'll find yourself standing alone in the ruins you created." He revved the engine, the roar echoing unnervingly in the quiet night, then sped off, leaving Ilara alone in the dust, a sudden chill creeping through her bones that had nothing to do with the autumn air. It was a promise, unspoken but clear, that her fight for Oakhaven was far from over, and that the Thorns would not relinquish their hold without a brutal, unforgiving struggle. Chase Thorn's words, "When the music stops, you'll find yourself standing alone in the ruins you created," echoed in Ilara's mind. A chilling whisper carried on the autumn wind. The roar of his engine faded into the night, leaving her alone on the old stone bridge, the cold seeping into her bones. It was a direct threat, not just to her nascent dream, but to her very spirit. She felt a tremor of fear, a primal instinct to retreat, to hide from the formidable power of the Thorns. But then she thought of her mother, of the unplayed song, of the faces in the hall that had looked at her with hope. And the tremor solidified into a steely resolve. The next morning, the air in Oakhaven was thick with an unusual electricity. News of Ilara's defiant stand at the festival had spread like wildfire. Whispers followed her as she walked to the diner for her morning coffee. Not the dismissive whispers of old, but curious, hopeful ones. The local newspaper, the Oak Haven Chronicle, usually a staid record of births, deaths, and town council meetings, featured a bold headline: "Local Woman Challenges Status Quo, Calls for Oak Haven Revival Project." Beneath it was a blurry photo of Ilara at the piano, her head bowed in concentration. At the diner, the usual morning chatter was replaced by animated discussions about the project. Sarah Jenkins, the young waitress who had pledged her support, beamed as she poured Ilara's coffee. "Everyone's talking about it, Ilara. People are excited." Ilara felt a surge of warmth. "Excited is good, Sarah. Now comes the hard part: organizing that excitement." Their first meeting for the Oak Haven Revival Project was scheduled for that evening in the community hall. Ilara arrived early, her heart thrumming with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. She expected a handful of the most dedicated, perhaps a dozen or so. What she found, however, took her breath away. The hall, usually so sparsely attended, was nearly full. Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Gable, Old Man Miller, they were all there. But there were also younger faces, families with children, even a few faces she didn't recognize, newcomers to Oak Haven who had heard the buzz. A palpable energy filled the room, a collective eagerness. Ilara stood before them, a simple woman in a worn cardigan, but radiating a newfound authority. She looked at the broken piano, its dust-laden keys still bearing the faint imprint of her fingers, and then at the expectant faces. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "This isn't just about restoring a piano. It's about restoring Oak Haven." She outlined her vision: fundraising events, community workshops, local craft fairs to showcase Oak Haven's talent. She spoke of turning the community hall into a vibrant cultural center, a place where people of all ages could gather, learn, and create. She spoke of dignity, of self-reliance, of proving to the world and to themselves that Oak Haven was not dead. The response was overwhelming. Hands shot up with ideas, offers of help. A retired carpenter volunteered to assess the hall's structural needs. A former schoolteacher offered to organize educational programs. A young graphic designer, recently returned to Oak Haven from the city, offered to create promotional materials. The energy was contagious, electric. Ilara watched them, a profound sense of wonder blossoming in her chest. This wasn't just her dream anymore, it was theirs. But as the meeting wound down, a shadow fell. Mr. Henderson approached Ilara, his usual gentle demeanor clouded by worry. "Ilara," he began, his voice lowered, "be careful. I heard whispers. The Thorns aren't taking this lightly, especially Chase." Ilara's spine stiffened. "What kind of whispers, Mr. Henderson?" "Rumors," he said, glancing around nervously. "About building permits suddenly being reviewed more closely. About difficulties for local businesses trying to get new loans. Even talk of the town council reassessing the lease for this very hall." He gestured around the room, his eyes troubled. "They're trying to choke us before we even start." A cold dread seeped into Ilara. This was Chase Thorne's threat made real. They wouldn't fight fair. They would use their influence, their power, to crush the movement before it could gain real momentum. The Thorns didn't just own the mill. They owned key members of the town council, the bank, and much of the town's land. "We have to be ready for this," Ilara said, her voice grim. "They want to scare us. They want us to retreat. But we won't. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The Oak Haven Revival Project gained momentum, propelled by Ilara's unwavering leadership and the collective passion of the town. Fundraisers were planned, volunteers rallied, and a buzz of optimism permeated the air. But as their efforts intensified, so did the subtle, insidious pushback from the Thorns. Old Man Miller's hardware store suddenly faced stricter inspections, delaying crucial supply shipments. Mrs. Gable's small quilting cooperative, which relied on the town's only bank for microloans, found their applications mysteriously stalled. Building permit requests for minor repairs to the community hall, submitted by the Revival Project, were met with endless bureaucratic delays from the town council. Ilara felt the pressure mounting, a tightening vice around her burgeoning hope. Every step forward seemed to be met with 2 steps back, orchestrated by an unseen hand. It was a war of attrition designed to exhaust their spirit, to break their will. One afternoon, as Ilara was hanging flyers for their first community bake sale, Bethany Thorne pulled up beside her in her pristine SUV. Her window hummed down. "Still wasting your time with these ridiculous fantasies, Ilara?" Bethany's smile was chillingly sweet. "My brother tells me the council is discussing new regulations for public events. All that paperwork. It's a shame, really. So much effort for so little return." Ilara met her gaze, refusing to back down. "We're not afraid of paperwork, Bethany, or your brother's empty threats. This town is bigger than your family's ego." Bethany's smile vanished. "You really don't understand, do you? Some battles simply cannot be won, Ilara. Not when you're up against the inevitable." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "And some people are too proud to know when to quit. Be careful, Ilara. Very careful. My brother has ways of ensuring things. Return to normal." With that, she drove off, leaving Ilara with a profound sense of unease. Later that week, as Ilara walked past the Oak Haven Bank, she saw a notice taped to the door. It was an official announcement from the town council, printed in stark, impersonal black and white. It stated that due to structural integrity concerns and unspecified safety hazards, the Oak Haven Community Hall, effective immediately, was deemed unfit for public gatherings until extensive and costly repairs were made. The notice declared the hall condemned. Ilara stared at the paper, her blood running cold. Condemned. It was a death sentence for the Revival Project, a crushing blow before they had even begun. This was no subtle pressure. This was a direct assault. The Thorns had played their hand, and it was a devastating one. Her vision, the budding hope of Oak Haven, felt like it was crumbling around her. She had promised them a future, and now it felt like she had led them straight into a dead end. And as she crumpled the notice in her trembling hand, a horrifying thought pierced through the dread. What if Chase was right? What if she truly had created nothing but ruins? Ilara stared at the notice, her blood running cold, the word condemned searing itself into her mind. The paper, crisp and official, crumpled in her trembling hand as the horrifying realization hit her. Chase Thorne wasn't just threatening, he was acting. The Thorns had played their hand, and it was a devastating one, a direct assault on the very heart of the Oak Haven Revival Project. Her vision, the budding hope of the town, felt like it was crumbling around her. What if Chase was right? What if she truly had created nothing but ruins? The silence on Main Street felt deafening, broken only by the mournful rustle of autumn leaves. Ilara felt a wave of nausea, a profound sense of failure washing over her. She had rallied these people, ignited a fragile hope, and now the very ground they stood on had been snatched away. Within minutes, the news spread through Oakhaven like wildfire. Phones buzzed. Anxious whispers turned into frustrated shouts. And soon, a small crowd began to gather outside the community hall, their faces a mix of anger and despair. Old Man Miller ran a hand through his thinning hair, his usual gruffness replaced by a deep resignation. Mrs. Gable wiped away tears, her knitting bag clutched tightly to her chest. Sarah Jenkins, her initial youthful optimism replaced by a bitter disillusionment, looked at Alara with a silent, questioning plea. Alara walked towards them, her steps heavy, her heart sinking with each footfall. She had promised them a future, and now it felt like she had led them straight into a dead end. "Alara, what does this mean?" Mr. Henderson asked, his voice strained. "Condemned? Just like that? After all our plans?" His gaze was filled with the same fear and defeat that Alara remembered seeing in her mother's eyes years ago. Alara held up the crumpled notice, her voice barely a whisper. "It means," she said, trying to steady her resolve, "that the town council, undoubtedly influenced by the Thorns, has declared the hall unsafe. They've condemned it. We can't hold meetings here. We can't hold any events. They've cut off our lifeline." A wave of groans and frustrated exclamations swept through the crowd. "This is a joke!" someone shouted. "There's nothing wrong with this hall that a few repairs couldn't fix." "They want to stop us," Alara stated, her voice gaining strength, infused with a new anger. "They want to scare us back into submission. They want us to believe there's no hope for Oakhaven outside of their control." She looked at their faces, their despair mirroring her own. But beneath the despair, she saw a flicker of the defiance she had ignited. "We can't let them win," she insisted, her voice rising. "We can't let them take away our hope. Not now. Not when we've just begun to find our voice again." But the practicalities were crushing. Without the hall, where would they meet? Where would they host their fundraisers? The entire Oakhaven Revival Project revolved around this central community space. Suddenly, a sleek, dark car, Chase Thorne's sedan, pulled up to the curb. He emerged, followed by Bethany, both of them dressed impeccably, their expressions a carefully orchestrated mix of sorrow and superiority. "Alara," Chase began, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "I warned you. I told you this would happen. You stirred up false hope, and now look at the consequence. The town council has made a difficult but necessary decision. Safety must come first." He cast a mournful glance at the hall. A shame, really. Such a beautiful building in its day. Bethany stepped forward, her smile thin and cruel. "Perhaps now everyone understands, Alara. Some things are simply too far gone to save, and some people are simply too naive to see the bigger picture. Oakhaven needs leadership, not pipe dreams." The townspeople shifted uncomfortably, some casting fearful glances at the Thorns. The old patterns of submission were hard to break. Alara felt the fragile hope begin to crack. But then, Mr. Henderson, his face etched with resolve, took a step forward. "This hall isn't broken, Chase. It's neglected. Just like this town has been neglected by your family for years." His voice, usually so quiet, rang with a surprising fury. Chase's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone, Mr. Henderson. There are official channels for these kinds of concerns." "Official channels?" Mrs. Gable burst out, her voice trembling with emotion. "You control the channels, Chase. You control the council. This isn't about safety. It's about power." The exchange grew heated, voices rising, accusations flying. The tension was palpable, a live wire humming between the two factions. Ilara watched, a renewed spark of fire igniting within her. They were angry, yes, but they were also united in their anger. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning of the fight. "They think they've silenced us," Ilara declared, stepping between the shouting groups, her voice cutting through the din. "They think they've won, but they haven't. They've just given us a new battleground." She turned to the community hall, her gaze sweeping over its condemned facade. "This building is just a building. Our community, our spirit, that's what matters. And that, they can't condemn." She turned back to the crowd, her eyes shining with fierce determination. "We will not be defeated by a piece of paper. We will find another place to meet. We will find a way to fund the repairs for this hall, and we will make it stronger than ever. But first," she paused, her gaze landing on the still-standing broken piano visible through the dusty windows. "We need a sign. A symbol that their condemnation means nothing." Ilara's mind raced, a daring, almost reckless idea forming. It was dangerous, defiant, and would directly challenge the Thorns in a way they couldn't ignore. It would show Oakhaven and the Thorns that their spirit was indomitable. "We need to get that piano out of there," Ilara announced, her voice strong and unwavering, "before they try to get rid of it, before they try to silence its music forever." Her gaze swept over the bewildered faces of the townspeople, then directly to the Thorns, her challenge clear. "We're going to rescue our symbol, right now." Chase and Bethany Thorne exchanged a look of pure shock, then outrage. "You can't!" Chase exclaimed, stepping forward, his face contorted in disbelief. "That's illegal! You'll be trespassing! You'll face consequences!" But Ilara ignored him. She was already striding towards the hall's main entrance, a plan forming in her mind, a reckless surge of adrenaline pushing her forward. She glanced back at the faces of the townspeople, some still hesitant, others already moving to follow her. This was it. This was their moment of defiance. This was the moment they truly chose their future. The stakes were impossibly high, but the alternative, silence, surrender, was far worse. The old wooden doors of the condemned hall, chained and padlocked, stood before them, a formidable barrier. How would they get in? And what would be the price? "You can't!" Chase Thorne's furious shout echoed down Main Street, a desperate attempt to assert control. "That's illegal. You'll be trespassing. You'll face consequences." His words were meant to paralyze, to instill fear. But Ilara, standing before the chained and padlocked doors of the Oakhaven Community Hall, felt a surge of adrenaline, not fear. The threat was real, but so was the burgeoning hope, the defiant spirit of the townspeople gathering behind her. The very idea of leaving the piano, her mother's legacy, Oakhaven's symbol, to decay in a condemned building, was unthinkable. "Consequences for what, Chase?" Ilara challenged, turning to face him, her voice ringing with clarity. "For retrieving property that belongs to this community? For saving a piece of Oakhaven's soul from your family's calculated neglect?" Her gaze swept over the crowd. "This hall belongs to us. That piano belongs to us. And we are taking it back." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, replacing their initial apprehension with a growing sense of shared purpose. Chase Thorne's face was a mask of furious disbelief, but he was losing control of the narrative, and more importantly, of the people. "How are we going to get in, Ilara?" Old Man Miller asked, his voice gruff but edged with anticipation. He gestured to the heavy chains wrapped around the door handles, secured with a formidable padlock. Ilara paused, her eyes scanning the building. The front doors were impossible without brute force, which they didn't have, and would make their defiance seem like vandalism. But she remembered something from her years cleaning the hall, a detail others might have overlooked. "The side entrance," she announced, pointing to a smaller, less conspicuous door at the back of the building, usually used by staff for deliveries. "It's old, and I recall the latch on the inside was always a bit temperamental." She didn't wait for permission. She strode towards the side of the hall, the townspeople following her, a determined procession. Chase Thorne shouted for someone to call the sheriff, but his voice was lost in the excited chatter of the crowd. At the side door, Ilara found what she remembered, a simple wooden door, clearly less reinforced than the main entrance. It had a heavy iron latch, secured from the outside by a simple bolt, but the wood around it looked weathered, the screws loose. "Mr. Miller," Ilara said, turning to the hardware store owner, "do you happen to have a screwdriver? Perhaps a pry bar on you?" Old Man Miller's eyes twinkled. "Always prepared, Ilara. Never know when a community needs a little gentle persuasion." He pulled a sturdy screwdriver from his worn jacket pocket, a tool that looked like it had seen decades of service. Working quickly, with surprising dexterity for his age, Mr. Miller began to loosen the screws holding the bolt plate to the doorframe. The wood groaned in protest, splintering slightly under the pressure. The townspeople watched in rapt silence, their faces a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Bethany Thorne, who had followed them, scoffed, "This is pathetic. You think you're heroes, breaking into a condemned building?" "We're not breaking in, Bethany," Ilara retorted, her eyes fixed on Mr. Miller's determined efforts. "We're liberating. There's a difference." With a final, protesting creak, the bolt plate tore free from the decaying wood. Mr. Miller pushed the door open, revealing a dark, dusty interior. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of old wood and neglect. The community hall, once the vibrant heart of Oakhaven, felt like a tomb. "All right," Ilara said, stepping over the threshold. "We need to be careful. The Thorns will try to stop us." She turned to the gathering townspeople. "We need people to help move the piano. Mr. Henderson, Mr. Miller, can you organize a few strong backs? Sarah, can you and Mrs. Gable clear a path?" The small army of Oakhaven residents sprang into action. They moved quickly, efficiently, a cohesive unit working towards a shared goal. Flashlights from their phones illuminated the cavernous space. Dust motes danced in the sparse beams of light as they made their way to the stage, where the broken piano sat, a silent sentinel. When they reached the piano, a collective gasp went through the crowd. In the dim light, the piano looked even more forlorn, its grand form a stark contrast to its dilapidated state. But beneath the dust and decay, its presence was still commanding. "All right, folks," Mr. Henderson directed, his voice firm. "This isn't light. We need to lift it gently, get it onto the dollies we brought. Carefully. We don't want to damage it further." As a group of men carefully positioned themselves around the piano, preparing to lift, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. The police. Chase Thorne had made his call. A wave of panic rippled through the hall. "They're here," someone whispered, fear lacing their voice. Ilara's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "We don't have much time. We need to move. Carefully, but quickly." With a synchronized grunt, the men lifted the heavy piano onto two makeshift dollies, borrowed from Old Man Miller's store. The old wheels groaned under the weight, but they held. Step by agonizing step, they began to wheel the piano towards the side door. The sirens grew louder, closer. Red and blue lights began to flash through the windows, painting the dust-filled hall in an eerie, pulsating glow. Ilara pushed aside a stray cobweb, her eyes fixed on the door, urging them on. They were so close. Just as the front of the piano cleared the side door, two uniformed officers burst through, their faces stern, flashlights sweeping the room. Chase and Bethany Thorne stood behind them, their expressions a mix of triumph and smug satisfaction. "Ilara Vance," the lead officer, Officer Davies, barked, his voice stern. "You are trespassing on condemned property and attempting to remove town assets without authorization. Cease immediately, or we will be forced to make arrests." Ilara froze, her hand still on the dusty side of the piano. The townspeople behind her, their faces now pale with fear, stopped pushing. The piano, half in, half out of the doorway, seemed to hold its breath. Chase Thorne's triumphant smile widened. He had them. He had truly won. But then, Ilara looked at the broken piano, its silent keys, its dusty veneer. She thought of her mother, of the music, of the hope that had sparked in Oakhaven. She thought of Mr. Henderson, of Mrs. Gable, of Sarah, who had dared to believe, and she knew she couldn't stop. "Officer Davies," Ilara said, her voice clear, defiant. "This piano is not a town asset to be forgotten in a condemned building. It is a symbol. It is our heritage, and we are not stealing it. We are rescuing it." She turned to the townspeople, her gaze burning with an unwavering resolve. Are we going to let them condemn our spirit too? Or are we going to see this through? Before Davies could respond, before Chase could utter another victorious word, Ilara looked at the men holding the piano. "Now!" she commanded, her voice ringing with unexpected power. With a final desperate heave, they pulled the piano out of the condemned hall, just as Officer Davies lunged forward. The piano rolled free, out into the open air, as a chorus of gasps and then a few tentative cheers erupted from the townspeople. It was out, but Ilara knew, as Officer Davies closed in on her, his hand reaching for her arm, that the price of this defiance was about to be paid. "Now!" Ilara commanded, her voice ringing with unexpected power. With a final, desperate heave, the townspeople pulled the piano out of the condemned hall, just as Officer Davies lunged forward. The piano rolled free into the open air, a chorus of gasps, and then a few tentative cheers erupted from the onlookers. It was out. But Ilara knew, as Officer Davies's hand closed firmly on her arm, that the price of this defiance was about to be paid. "Ilara Vance, you are under arrest for trespassing and theft of town property," Officer Davies stated, his voice devoid of emotion, as he clicked handcuffs around her wrists. The cold metal bit into her skin, a stark reminder of the gravity of their act. A collective gasp went through the crowd. "No, you can't!" Mrs. Gable cried, stepping forward, her face streaked with tears. "She wasn't stealing, she was saving it." Mr. Henderson and Old Man Miller positioned themselves protectively around the piano, their faces grim. Sarah Jenkins looked on, her youthful hope replaced by wide-eyed horror. Chase Thorne stepped forward, a smug grin plastered on his face. "Finally, Officer Davies, thank you for handling this situation. Some people just don't understand the law." He cast a triumphant look at Ilara, whose eyes met his with a defiant glare. "She's innocent," someone from the crowd shouted. "This is just the Thorns trying to silence us." The scene erupted into chaos. Voices rose in protest, shouting accusations at the Thorns and pleas for Ilara. Officer Davies, clearly overwhelmed by the unexpected public outcry, struggled to maintain order. "Everyone calm down, disperse or face arrest." Ilara stood tall, despite the heavy cuffs, her gaze unwavering as she looked at the faces in the crowd. Their anger, their frustration, their fear, it was all there. But so was a fierce loyalty, a nascent refusal to be silenced. This was what she had sparked, a flame that even the thorns, with all their power, couldn't easily extinguish. "This is exactly what they want, Oakhaven," Ilara called out, her voice carrying over the din. "They want us to be afraid. They want us to give up. But we won't. The piano is safe. Now keep fighting for our town." Her words, though spoken through the humiliating reality of her arrest, resonated with a new power. As Officer Davies began to lead her towards his patrol car, a cheer, raw and defiant, erupted from the crowd. It wasn't a cheer of victory, but of solidarity, a pledge that her sacrifice would not be in vain. She glanced back, seeing the piano sitting proudly in the evening light, a beacon of defiance. Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Gable, and Old Man Miller were still standing guard around it, their shoulders squared. A small, sad smile touched Ilara's lips. They would protect it. She knew they would. The drive to the Oakhaven County Jail was short and silent. Ilara sat in the back of the patrol car, the cold metal of the handcuffs a constant pressure. Her mind raced. What would happen to her? Would she be charged? Would this all be for nothing? At the jail, the processing was swift and impersonal. Her fingerprints were taken, a mugshot snapped, and then she was led to a small, cold cell. The heavy steel door clanged shut behind her, plunging her into a suffocating isolation. The silence of the cell was a stark contrast to the cacophony of the hall, and in it, the fear she had held at bay began to creep in. She sat on the thin cot, staring at the concrete wall, her dreams of Oakhaven revival feeling impossibly far away. Chase's words echoed again. "When the music stops, you'll find yourself standing alone in the ruins you created." Had he been right? Hours later, the clang of the cell door brought her back to reality. A different officer, a kindly woman named Officer Bethany, stood there. "You have a visitor, Ilara Vance." Ilara's heart pounded. Who could it be? She followed the officer to a small visitation room, her mind racing through possibilities. A lawyer? One of the townspeople? Her breath caught in her throat when she saw him. Sitting across the table, his face etched with concern, was Caleb Thorne. Not Chase, not Bethany, but Caleb, the youngest of the Thorne siblings, the quiet one, the one who had left Oakhaven years ago to pursue a career in environmental law, the one who had always seemed to exist outside the family's oppressive shadow, the one she hadn't seen in over a decade. Their eyes met. The years melted away, replaced by the ghost of shared childhood memories, of whispered secrets by the river, of a friendship that had been brutally severed by the weight of their family names. A warmth, unexpected and powerful, spread through her, quickly followed by a pang of betrayal. Had he come to gloat? To condemn her like the rest of his family? "Caleb," Ilara managed, her voice hoarse. He nodded, his gaze gentle but intense. "Ilara, I heard what happened, what you did." He paused, his eyes scanning her face, taking in her disheveled appearance. "Are you all right?" His concern felt genuine, disarming. "I'm in jail, Caleb," she stated flatly, a hint of bitterness in her tone. "I'm not sure 'all right' applies." He offered a small, sympathetic smile. "I know. It's a mess." but I'm here to help." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. "My family's trying to crush this, Ilara. Not just you, but Oak Haven. They've been doing it for years, slowly, insidiously. I couldn't stand by and watch them do it to you, to this town anymore." Ilara stared at him, bewildered. "Help? Why, Caleb? Your family put me here. Your family is trying to destroy everything I'm trying to build." His expression hardened, a steely resolve in his eyes that reminded her briefly of his father. "Because Oak Haven is my home too, Ilara. And what you're doing, what you're fighting for, it's what this town needs, what it deserves. More than that, what you played at the festival, Oak Haven's Lament. That song means more to me than you know. It's tied to a promise I made a long time ago, and I think I know how to fight them. I think I know how to get you out of here, and more importantly, how to get that hall back." He paused, his gaze intense, piercing through the years of separation. "But it will be dangerous, Ilara, more dangerous than you can imagine. Are you willing to trust me? Are you willing to fight for this, even if it means fighting my own family?" The question hung in the air, a pivotal choice. Caleb Thorne, a voice from her past, a member of the very family trying to destroy her, was offering a lifeline. But what was the cost of accepting it? And could she truly trust a Thorne? "Are you willing to trust me? Are you willing to fight for this, even if it means fighting my own family?" Caleb Thorne's question hung in the stale air of the visitation room, heavy with unspoken history. Ilara stared at him, memories flooding back. Caleb, the quiet boy who used to sneak her comics behind his father's back. Caleb, who had listened intently when she spoke of her mother's music, a rare understanding in his eyes. But then came the harder memories, the growing distance, his departure from Oak Haven, the years of silence while his family tightened their grip on the town. Could she trust him now, after all this time, after all his family had done? Her gaze hardened, not with animosity, but with a fierce pragmatism born of her life's struggles. "Trust is a luxury I haven't had much of, Caleb, especially not when it comes to the Thorne family. What's your angle? Your family wants to crush me. Why are you suddenly their prodigal son, here to save the day?" Caleb didn't flinch. His eyes, so unlike Chase's cold calculation, held a genuine pain. "No angle, Ilara. Only a conscience. I left Oak Haven because I couldn't stand what my father and Chase were doing to it, to the people. I went to law school because I wanted to fight injustice, and seeing what they're doing to you, to this town, it's the very injustice I swore to fight." He paused, his voice dropping, tinged with regret. "And Oak Haven's Lament, that song. My mother used to play it. Your mother taught it to her, subtly, when they thought no one was listening. It was their secret song of hope. And my mother, she carried that hope, but she also carried the burden of my father's ambition, his vision for the mill. She loved Oak Haven, loved its people. She always wanted to help, but she was trapped." His eyes held a flicker of a deep, personal grief. "Before she died, she made me promise. Promise I'd never let Oak Haven's spirit die. Promise I'd protect its heart. You, Ilara, and that music. You're the first real hope this town has had in decades, and I intend to keep my promise." The sincerity in his voice was palpable, raw. It resonated with Ilara, touching a part of her she thought had long since withered. He spoke of his mother, a woman Ilara had rarely seen but knew through the whispers of kindness from others, a quiet counterpoint to the Thorne patriarch's iron will. The idea that her mother's song had connected them, bridging not just their mothers but their very lives, was a revelation. "So you want to help," Ilara said, her voice still cautious. "But how?" "My charges are real, Caleb, and the hall is condemned. My revival project is dead before it even began." Caleb leaned closer, his voice urgent. "Not dead, just stalled. My family controls the town council, yes, but they operate within the letter of the law, barely. And the law, Ilara, can be twisted, but it can also be turned against them." He began to outline his plan, speaking quickly, his legal mind sharp and precise. "First, your charges. Trespassing, yes. Theft? Highly debatable. That piano has long been considered abandoned. We can argue you were preventing further decay of a cultural artifact, not stealing. We'll get you out on bail. My firm can handle it. Pro bono." Ilara's brows furrowed. Pro bono? A big city law firm taking on a small-town case like mine? "Consider it my family's penance," Caleb said grimly. "More importantly, the hall. Condemnation is a serious matter, but it requires due process. There are public health and safety regulations they have to follow, detailed inspection reports. I have reason to believe my brother pushed this through faster than was legal, based on flimsy, possibly fabricated evidence. My firm has resources. We can call for an independent inspection, challenge their findings." Ilara felt a flicker of hope, bright and tenacious. "And if we win? If we get the condemnation lifted?" "Then we not only get the hall back," Caleb's eyes gleamed with a strategist's fire, "but we expose their corruption. We show Oakhaven and the wider county exactly what the Thorns are willing to do to maintain their power. It will be a public relations nightmare for them. It will give you the moral high ground and the political leverage to make your revival project unstoppable." He painted a compelling picture, but the risks were enormous. To challenge the Thorns, to expose their corruption, it wouldn't just be a legal battle, it would be a war. They would retaliate harder and more ruthlessly than ever before. "And what about you, Caleb?" Ilara asked, her gaze piercing. "If you do this, you'll be fighting your own family. Your father, Chase, Bethany, they won't forgive you. You'll be cut off. Everything you've worked for could be jeopardized." Caleb met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "Some things are more important than family legacy, Ilara. Some things are worth fighting for, even if it means standing alone against your own blood. My mother taught me that. And you reminded me of it. So, what's it going to be, Ilara? Do we fight for Oakhaven? Together?" He extended a hand across the table, his eyes earnest, expectant. The choice was stark. Succumb to despair and let the Thorns win, or take a monumental risk, forming an unlikely alliance with the very family name that had shadowed her life. Her freedom, the future of Oakhaven, the legacy of her mother's song, it all hinged on this one decision. Ilara looked at his outstretched hand, then back into his eyes. She saw not just a lawyer, but a kindred spirit, a man carrying his own burdens, his own silent promises. She saw a chance, however slim, to turn the tide. She thought of the faces in the hall, their initial hope, their defiance as she was led away in handcuffs. She couldn't let them down. She couldn't let her mother's music die. With a surge of newfound resolve, Ilara reached out and clasped his hand, a silent pact forged in the sterile confines of a jail cell. "We fight, Caleb," she said, her voice firm. "We fight for Oakhaven. But know this, I'm not just fighting for a piano or a hall. I'm fighting for every person they've ever dismissed, every dream they've ever crushed, and I won't stop until Oakhaven can sing again." A faint smile touched Caleb's lips, a mix of relief and grim determination. "Good, because I have a feeling this fight is just beginning, Alara. And the thorns, they won't see us coming." He pulled his hand back, stood, and turned towards the door. "I'll start the bail process immediately. We'll get you out of here, and then we begin." As he left, Alara felt a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. She was no longer alone. But the path ahead was fraught with peril, a battle against a deeply entrenched power that wouldn't hesitate to use every weapon at its disposal. And as she sat there, the weight of the coming storm settled upon her, a chilling realization of the true cost of their audacious gamble. We fight, Caleb. We fight for Oakhaven." Ilara's words, a vow forged in the cold confines of the jail cell, resonated with a new strength she hadn't known she possessed. Caleb's handclasp had been firm, a silent promise of an alliance against the formidable power of his own family. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but the alternative, silence, surrender, was no longer an option. Within hours, Caleb's firm secured her bail. Stepping out of the jail into the crisp Oakhaven morning air felt like breathing for the first time in years. The sunlight, previously a mocking reminder of her confinement, now felt like a spotlight on the battle ahead. She saw the familiar faces of Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Gable, and Sarah waiting for her, their relief palpable. And there, safely parked outside Old Man Miller's hardware store, draped in a protective tarp, was the piano. Her mother's piano, Oakhaven's symbol. "We kept it safe, Alara," Mr. Henderson said, his voice thick with emotion, as he enveloped her in a relieved hug. "We never left its side." Alara's eyes welled. "Thank you, all of you. You saved it." Caleb, ever the strategist, cut through the emotional reunion. "The first step is done. Now the real fight begins. The town council meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday. They'll confirm the condemnation then. But before that, we bring in our own independent inspector." The following days were a whirlwind of activity, a frantic race against time. Caleb's legal team descended on Oakhaven, a beacon of metropolitan resolve in the quiet town. They meticulously reviewed the town council's condemnation report, uncovering discrepancies, rushed procedures, and glaring omissions. Simultaneously, an independent structural engineer, flown in by Caleb's firm, conducted a thorough inspection of the community hall. The tension in Oakhaven was palpable. The Thorns' usual public appearances were curtailed. They were clearly rattled, but not defeated. Whispers of counterattacks, of further pressure on the council, swirled through the town. Alara and Caleb worked side by side, a dynamic that surprised them both. He was logical, meticulous, driven by a quiet but powerful sense of justice. She was the heart, the soul of the movement, connecting with the townspeople, reminding them of what they were fighting for. Late nights were spent poring over documents, their hands brushing as they reached for the same report, a spark of unspoken connection growing between them, born of shared purpose and a mutual understanding of Oakhaven's fading dream. He saw her strength, her unwavering spirit. She saw his quiet integrity, a profound kindness that transcended his family name. Finally, the independent inspector's report came in. It was damning. The hall, while in need of repairs, was not structurally unsound. The original condemnation report was a thinly veiled fabrication, exaggerated for political gain. The Thorns' scheme was exposed. The night of the town council meeting arrived, heavy with the weight of Oak Haven's future. The community hall was, ironically, the planned venue for its own condemnation hearing. But with the independent report now in hand, Caleb had secured a temporary injunction, allowing the meeting to be held there, ensuring the townspeople could fill the very space the Thorns sought to close. The air inside the hall was electric, a palpable mix of fear and fervent hope. Every seat was filled, townspeople spilling into the aisles, their eyes fixed on the dais where the 5 council members, including the Thorns' most vocal allies, sat stiffly. Ilara and Caleb sat in the front row, a united front. Across the room, Chase, Bethany, and their father, Mr. Thorne Sr., sat with grim, unyielding expressions. The meeting began with a dry recitation of the initial condemnation report. Then, Caleb stood, his presence commanding, his voice resonating with legal authority. He presented the independent findings, dismantling the council's claims point by point, revealing the fabricated evidence, the rushed process. He exposed the blatant abuse of power, the deliberate attempt to silence the Oak Haven Revival Project. A collective gasp went through the room as the extent of the Thorns' deception was laid bare. Mr. Thorne Sr. rose, his face purple with rage. "This is slander, a desperate attempt to discredit honest public servants. My son is orchestrating this charade because he resents his family's position." Chase and Bethany echoed his outrage, shouting accusations of manipulation and family betrayal. The meeting threatened to descend into chaos, voices clashing, tempers flaring. But Ilara, rising beside Caleb, brought the room back to a stunned silence. She didn't speak of legalities or reports. She walked to the center of the hall, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her neighbors, her friends. She spoke of her mother, of Oak Haven's lament, and of the spirit it embodied. "This isn't about structural reports or legal jargon," Ilara began, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the lingering tension. "This is about the soul of our town, the piano they tried to condemn, the hall they tried to close. They are symbols of Oak Haven's heartbeat. My mother composed a song, Oak Haven's Lament, because she saw the despair, the slow death of hope here. But she also saw the resilience, the quiet strength. She believed that even when things are broken, they can still make beautiful music if someone takes the time to listen, to care, to mend." She turned her gaze directly to the Thorns, her eyes holding no anger, only a profound, heartbreaking clarity. "You tried to silence us because a singing Oak Haven threatens your control. You thrive on our despair, on our resignation. But you underestimated us. You underestimated the power of a single song, of a broken piano, of a community that finally decided to find its voice again." Then, she turned back to the council. "The independent report shows the truth. This hall is not condemned. It needs care, yes. It needs restoration. Just like Oak Haven needs care and restoration. But it is not dead, and neither are we." Her voice rose, ringing with conviction. "Tonight, you have a choice. You can vote to uphold a lie, to perpetuate the silence, to let Oak Haven truly die. Or you can vote for truth. You can vote for hope. You can vote to let Oak Haven sing again." The hall erupted, not in shouts, but in a groundswell of powerful applause, of cheers, of emotional cries of support. The townspeople, their spirits rekindled, stood united behind Ilara. The council members, visibly shaken, exchanged nervous glances. The Thorns, though still seething, saw their control slipping away, their narrative shattered by Ilara's heartfelt plea and Caleb's undeniable evidence. The council president, a man who had long cowered under Mr. Thorne Sr.'s influence, cleared his throat, his face pale. Given the new evidence and the overwhelming public sentiment, the motion to uphold the condemnation of the Oakhaven Community Hall is rejected. A roar went up from the crowd, a tidal wave of joyous sound that threatened to lift the very roof of the old hall. Ilara felt tears streaming down her face, tears of relief, of triumph, of a profound, liberating joy. Caleb placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of shared victory, his eyes shining with pride. The condemnation was lifted. Oakhaven had won. In the aftermath, the celebration was heartfelt, jubilant. The Thorns, defeated and humiliated, left the hall, their power in Oakhaven irrevocably diminished. The Oakhaven Revival Project was officially reinstated, fueled by a renewed passion and a tangible sense of victory. Days later, the old grand piano was carefully wheeled back into the community hall, not to its lonely corner, but to the center of the stage. Its restoration began almost immediately, a collective effort of the townspeople, each chip and crack a reminder of their shared journey. As Ilara watched the master craftsman gently repair a missing key, Caleb stood beside her. "You did it, Ilara," he said, his voice soft. "You brought Oakhaven back to life." She smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "We did it, Caleb. All of us." She looked at the piano, imagining its future songs, its resonant melodies filling the revitalized hall. "But this is just the beginning, isn't it? The music has to keep playing." She looked at him, their gazes meeting, a shared future, both personal and communal, shimmering with possibility. Caleb returned her gaze, a profound understanding passing between them. "Oh, Ilara," he said, taking her hand gently in his touch sending a spark through her. "I have a feeling Oakhaven is only just learning to truly sing, and its symphony is far from over." And so, Ilara Vance, the simple woman dismissed and overlooked, became the unlikely conductor of Oakhaven's rebirth. Her melody, once a quiet lament, transformed into a powerful anthem of hope, resilience, and unwavering truth. Through her journey, we're reminded that true strength often lies hidden beneath layers of quiet humility, waiting for the moment to ignite. Her story, and Oakhaven's, teaches us that injustice, however deeply entrenched, can be challenged by a single, brave voice, especially when that voice inspires a community to rise together. It's a poignant testament to the power of unity, proving that even the most broken dreams, like a neglected piano or a fading town, can be restored to a vibrant, resonant beauty. Ilara's defiance, her willingness to trust an unlikely ally, and Oakhaven's collective courage show us that second chances are not just wished for, but fought for, rebuilt note by painful, triumphant note. It's a reminder that every one of us holds an untold song within, capable of changing not just a room, but an entire world, if only we dare to play it. If this story resonated with your heart, please take a moment to like this video. Your support helps us share more powerful, meaningful narratives like Ilara's. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, so you never miss another journey of hope, courage, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.